The dust-laden wind carried more than just tumbleweeds across the barren stretch of Nevada territory that spring morning in 1873. It carried hope in the form of a lone woman clutching a crumpled letter to her chest. Nora Mitchell stepped off the stagecoach in Silvercreek, her once fine blue traveling dress now coated with a layer of grime that matched the weariness in her eyes. The small mining town was to be her salvation, the last stop on a journey that had taken her 3,000 miles from a life she desperately needed to leave behind in Boston. The wooden sign announcing Silvercreek, population 412, swung lazily in the breeze as Nora scanned the single dusty main street. A promise of marriage from a man she'd never met had brought her here, a desperate gamble for a woman with no other options. Frederick Jameson, cattle rancher and respected citizen, had placed an advertisement in the Eastern papers seeking a bride, and she had answered. "Miss Mitchell." A tall, broad-shouldered man approached, his hat tipped low against the sun. He removed it as he drew closer, revealing sandy brown hair and a face weathered by years under the harsh western sun. "Mr. Jameson?" Nora's voice trembled slightly. "Yes, Madam, Frederick Jameson," he offered a calloused hand. "Welcome to Silvercreek." Up close, Frederick was not at all what Nora had pictured from their correspondence. His letters had been formal, almost businesslike, but his eyes were kind, deep blue like the sky after a storm. A thin scar ran along his jawline, telling stories his letters never had. "Your journey was comfortable, I hope?" he asked, taking her small trunk from the stagecoach driver. "As comfortable as one might expect," she replied, attempting to brush some of the dust from her skirts. It was futile, Frederick nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Well, we've got about an hour's ride to the ranch. I brought the wagon." He gestured toward a sturdy buckboard hitched to two chestnut horses. The ride to the Jameson ranch was mostly silent. Nora felt the weight of her decision with each passing mile. The vast, open spaces of the territory were both breathtaking and terrifying to a woman raised in the confines of a busy city. Her gloved hands twisted nervously in her lap. "It ain't much," Frederick finally said as they crested a hill, revealing a modest two-story house with a large barn and corral nestled in a valley. "But it's good land, fertile, the creek never runs dry." "It's lovely," Nora said automatically, though her stomach knotted with anxiety. This remote place, miles from town, would be her home now. There would be no turning back. As Frederick helped her down from the wagon, Nora was acutely aware of the layer of travel dust covering her from head to toe. She'd had dreams of arriving looking presentable, making a good first impression on her future husband. Instead, she felt like a beggar arriving at a palace. An older woman emerged from the house, wiping her hands on an apron. "Mrs. Abigail Thompson," Frederick explained. "She helps with the cooking and cleaning, comes in from town 3 days a week." The woman nodded curtly at Nora. "Got your room ready, miss. Heated water for washing up, too." "Thank you," Nora said gratefully. "I'm afraid I'm not at my best after such a long journey." Frederick carried her trunk up to a simple but clean bedroom on the second floor. Sunlight streamed through lace curtains that fluttered in the breeze, illuminating a large copper tub filled with steaming water behind a folding screen. "I'll leave you to rest," he said, setting down her trunk. "Supper's at 6. Take your time." When he closed the door, Nora sank onto the bed, overwhelmed by the reality of her situation. She had sold nearly everything she owned to afford the train and stagecoach tickets west. There was no going back to Boston, not after what had happened. She moved to the window, gazing out at the vast expanse of rangeland that stretched to distant mountains. This land and this stranger represented her only chance at a new beginning. After washing away the worst of the travel grime, Nora changed into her second-best dress, a simple navy blue cotton with white piping. She'd sold most of her fine Boston clothes. They would have been impractical here anyway. Downstairs, Frederick and Mrs. Thompson were setting the table. The smell of beef stew and fresh bread made Nora realize how hungry she was. "Just in time," Frederick nodded toward a chair. "Hope you like beef stew, it's what we have most nights." The meal was simple but delicious. Mrs. Thompson excused herself shortly after, saying she needed to return to town before dark, leaving the future bride and groom alone. "So," Frederick cleared his throat, "I reckon we should discuss arrangements. Pastor Williams can marry us on Sunday after services if that suits you. Nora nearly choked on her tea, just 4 days away. That seems very soon. Well, it's not proper for us to be living under the same roof unwed, he said matter-of-factly, and I did pay for your passage west with the understanding that we'd be married. Yes, of course, Nora said quickly. Sunday will be fine. She set down her cup with slightly trembling hands. Frederick studied her for a moment. Miss Mitchell, I want to be clear about something. I need a wife, yes. Someone to help with the house, maybe give me children someday, but I don't expect. That is to say, I know this arrangement is unusual. I won't force anything upon you that you're not ready for. Nora felt a rush of relief. Thank you for your understanding, Mr. Jameson. Frederick, please. Frederick, she repeated, and you must call me Nora. He nodded, a slight smile softening his weathered features. Nora. That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed, Nora listened to the strange sounds of the countryside, the distant howl of coyotes, the soft lowing of cattle, the creaking of the house as it settled. So different from the constant noise of Boston. She thought of her mother's face when she'd announced her decision to become a mail-order bride. The shame, the disappointment, but her mother didn't know the full story. Nobody in Boston did except Charles. Even thinking his name made her stomach clench with fear and anger. She touched the fading bruise on her wrist, hidden beneath her sleeve. No, Boston held nothing for her now but painful memories and broken promises. Perhaps here, in this wild place with this quiet, serious man, she could build something new. The next morning, Nora woke at dawn to the sound of activity outside. From her window, she watched as Frederick worked with his ranch hands, moving cattle from one pasture to another. There were 3 other men, one older with a gray beard, and 2 younger men who appeared to be brothers. She dressed quickly in her simplest dress and made her way downstairs. The kitchen was empty, but coffee bubbled in a pot on the stove. Nora found a cup and poured herself some, then set about looking through cupboards to see what she might prepare for breakfast. She was frying bacon and mixing biscuit dough when Frederick came in, smelling of horses and fresh air. You didn't have to cook, he said, looking surprised. I wanted to, Nora replied. I may not know much about ranch life, but I do know how to cook a decent meal. He nodded appreciatively. The men would welcome some hot food. They're bringing in a few strays that broke through the fence last night. By the time the ranch hands came in, Nora had prepared a substantial breakfast of bacon, biscuits, and gravy. Frederick introduced her to the men old Pete, the ranch foreman who'd been with Frederick since he'd claimed the land 10 years earlier, and the Harper brothers, Sam and Daniel, who handled most of the physical labor around the ranch. The men were polite, if somewhat awkward around her. Clearly, a woman's presence at the ranch was a novelty. They ate ravenously, complimenting her cooking between mouthfuls. Miss Mitchell's going to be Mrs. Jameson come Sunday, Frederick told them as they were finishing. There'll be some changes around here. Old Pete tipped his hat to Nora. About time the boss found himself a good woman. Place needs a woman's touch. The Harper brothers nodded in agreement, though they seemed less enthusiastic about the prospect of changes. After breakfast, Frederick showed Nora around the ranch, the barn where they kept the horses and milk cow, the chicken coop, the tool shed, and the bunkhouse where the ranch hands slept. The main house, while not large, was sturdily built with 4 bedrooms upstairs, a parlor, dining room, and kitchen downstairs. Built it myself, Frederick said with quiet pride. Added the second floor 3 years back, thinking maybe someday. He trailed off, looking slightly embarrassed. It's a fine home, Nora assured him. As they walked back toward the house, Frederick pointed to a small garden plot that had clearly been neglected. Tried growing vegetables last year, but between the ranch work and the drought, it didn't amount to much. Nora knelt to examine the soil. It looks fertile enough. With some care, we could have quite a garden here. That would be nice, Frederick said. Gets expensive buying everything from the mercantile in town. Their eyes met, and for a moment, Nora could imagine a future here, tending a garden, making this house a home, perhaps even children someday. It was a simple vision, far removed from the life she had once dreamed of in Boston, but there was an honesty to it that appealed to her. The next few days passed in a blur of activity as Nora settled into life at the ranch. Mrs. Thompson came on Thursday and helped her prepare the house for the small wedding celebration they would have after the ceremony on Sunday. The older woman was brusque but efficient, and Nora appreciated her no-nonsense approach. "Been working for Mr. Jameson going on 8 years now," Mrs. Thompson said as they polished the seldom-used silver for Sunday's dinner. "He's a good man, quiet but decent. Never known him to raise his voice or his hand to any one man or beast." Nora nodded, relieved to hear this confirmation of her own impressions. "How did he come to be here?" "Came west after the war, like a lot of men, fought for the Union from what I understand, never talks much about it. Worked cattle drives for a few years, saved every penny, then claimed this land when the territory opened it up for settlement. He has no family," Mrs. Thompson shook her head. "Lost his parents young, had a brother who died in the war, I believe. He's been alone a long time." Just like me, Nora thought. On Saturday afternoon, Frederick took Nora into town to buy supplies for the wedding feast and to introduce her to some of the townspeople. Silvercreek was small but growing, a single main street, lined with wooden buildings including a general store, a bank, 2 saloons, a hotel, and a small church. "Not much compared to Boston," Frederick commented as he helped her down from the wagon. "It has everything one needs," Nora replied diplomatically. The general store was owned by the mayor, Hiram Wilson, who greeted Frederick warmly and eyed Nora with obvious curiosity. "So this is your bride-to-be. Welcome to Silvercreek, Miss Mitchell." "We're mighty pleased Frederick finally found himself a wife." "Thank you, Mr. Wilson," Nora said, feeling self-conscious under the man's scrutiny. "Boston, eh?" Wilson continued. "We don't get many Easterners choosing to settle here. Most head to California or Oregon." "I'm looking forward to making a home here," Nora said, the practiced response already feeling natural on her lips. As they gathered supplies, several other townspeople came in, each eager to meet Frederick's mail-order bride. Nora endured their curious glances and occasional impertinent questions with as much grace as she could muster. She was aware of the whispers that followed them, speculation about what had brought an educated Eastern woman to this remote place as a mail-order bride. Frederick seemed to sense her discomfort. As they left the store, he murmured, "They don't mean any harm, just not used to newcomers, especially women from back east." "I understand," Nora said. "I'll have to get used to being an object of curiosity." Their last stop was the church, where they met with Pastor Williams to discuss the ceremony. The pastor was a thin, serious man who asked them several pointed questions about their understanding of marriage and their expectations of each other. "Marriage is not to be entered into lightly," he admonished, "especially one formed under such unusual circumstances." "We understand the commitment we're making," Frederick assured him, surprising Nora with the firmness in his voice. "Miss Mitchell and I may not have had a conventional courtship, but we both take this covenant seriously." The pastor seemed satisfied with this answer and agreed to perform the ceremony after Sunday services. As they drove back to the ranch, the sun was setting, painting the western sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. Nora found herself studying Frederick's profile, trying to reconcile the man beside her with the one she had imagined from his letters. He was more handsome than she had expected in a rugged way, and his manner was gentler than his weathered exterior might suggest. "Having second thoughts?" he asked suddenly, catching her gaze. "No," she said quickly, "just contemplating the strangeness of life's path." "A month ago, I never imagined I would be here," Frederick nodded. "Life has a way of taking unexpected turns, sometimes for the worse, sometimes for the better." He hesitated, then added, "I hope coming here will prove to be for the better for both of us." "I believe it will," Nora said, and was surprised to find she meant it. That night, Nora sat at the small writing desk in her room, penning a letter to her mother. She had promised to write once she was settled, though she doubted her mother would respond. The rift between them seemed too wide to bridge with mere words on paper. She described the ranch, the town, and in carefully chosen words, Frederick himself. She omitted any mention of her anxiety or the whispers in town. Let her mother believe she had found happiness here, even if that happiness was still more aspiration than reality. As she sealed the envelope, Nora was startled by a soft knock at her door. She opened it to find Frederick standing there, looking uncomfortable. "I'm sorry to disturb you," he said. "I just wanted to give you this." He held out a small box. Inside was a simple gold band with a tiny pearl set in the center. "It's not much," he said apologetically, "but I wanted you to have a proper ring for tomorrow." Nora was touched by the gesture. "It's beautiful, Frederick, thank you." "It was my mother's," he explained. "Only thing I have left of hers." The significance of the gift was not lost on Nora. "I'll treasure it." Frederick nodded, clearly relieved. "Well, good night then. Big day tomorrow." "Good night, Frederick." After he left, Nora tried on the ring. It fit perfectly, as if made for her finger. She stared at it for a long moment, overcome by a strange mixture of emotions: apprehension about the wedding, gratitude for Frederick's kindness, and an unexpected flutter of something that might, in time, grow into affection. Sunday dawned clear and warm. Nora dressed in her best gown, a pale blue silk that she had carefully preserved for special occasions. It was the last remnant of her former life, a reminder of who she had been before circumstances forced her to become who she was now, Mrs. Thompson arrived early to help her with her hair, arranging it in a simple but elegant style adorned with small white flowers from the wild rosebushes that grew near the creek. "You make a lovely bride," the older woman said, her usual gruffness softening for a moment. "Thank you," Nora replied, studying her reflection in the small mirror. The woman who looked back at her seemed both familiar and strange, the same features, but somehow transformed by the journey and the decision that had brought her to this place. Frederick knocked on her door promptly at 10 o'clock, dressed in a clean black suit that looked as though it had rarely been worn. His hair was neatly combed, and he had trimmed his beard. He stared at her for a moment, a look of genuine appreciation in his eyes. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you. You look very handsome yourself." He offered his arm, and together they walked to the wagon where old Pete waited to drive them to town. The Harper brothers followed in a second wagon, freshly shaved and wearing clean shirts for the occasion. The church was full when they arrived, the regular Sunday service just concluding. As Pastor Williams announced that a wedding would follow, there was a buzz of excitement among the congregation. Most remained in their seats, eager to witness the union of Frederick Jameson and his Eastern bride. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. Nora spoke her vows in a clear voice, promising to love, honor, and obey this man who was still largely a stranger to her. Frederick's deep voice was steady as he made the same promises to her. When he slipped the gold band onto her finger, his hand trembled slightly, the only outward sign of any nervousness he might be feeling. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Pastor Williams declared. "You may kiss your bride." Frederick leaned down and placed a gentle, chaste kiss on Nora's lips, their first physical contact beyond a handshake or his hand at her elbow. His lips were warm and surprisingly soft, the brief touch sending an unexpected tingle through her. The congregation applauded as they turned to face them as husband and wife. Nora was struck by the genuine good wishes on the faces of these people who were still strangers to her. Perhaps, in time, they would become friends and neighbors rather than just curious onlookers. After receiving congratulations from seemingly everyone in town, they returned to the ranch for a small celebration. Mrs. Thompson had prepared a feast: a roast chicken, fresh bread, vegetables from her own garden, and a cake decorated with preserved berries. A few of the closer neighbors joined them, along with Pastor Williams and Mayor Wilson and his wife. The parlor was crowded but festive, filled with conversation and laughter. Nora found herself genuinely enjoying the celebration, the warmth of the community beginning to ease her sense of being an outsider. As the afternoon waned, the guests gradually departed, offering final congratulations and, in some cases, advice of varying degrees of propriety to the newlyweds. Mrs. Thompson was the last to leave, giving Nora a brief, awkward hug. "You'll do fine," the older woman whispered. "He's a patient man." Then Frederick and Nora were alone, truly alone for the first time since her arrival, husband and wife, yet still virtual strangers. "Well," Frederick said, looking around at the remains of the celebration, "that went nicely." "Yes, it did," Nora agreed. Everyone was very kind. An awkward silence fell between them. The elephant in the room, the wedding night that lay ahead, loomed large in both their minds. Frederick cleared his throat. "I meant what I said the other day about not expecting. That is, I know this isn't a conventional marriage. We can take time to get to know each other better before. Nora felt a rush of gratitude for his understanding. Thank you, I would appreciate that. Relief flooded his features. Good, that's good. He began gathering plates from the table. Why don't we clean up together, then maybe we could just talk for a while. And so their first evening as husband and wife was spent washing dishes side by side and then sitting in the parlor, getting to know each other in a way they hadn't during her first days at the ranch. Frederick told her about his childhood in Pennsylvania, his years in the Union Army, and his decision to head west after losing his brother in the war. Couldn't face going home without him, he explained. Thought I'd find a fresh start out here. Nora shared stories of her own childhood in Boston, her education at a ladies' academy, her love of literature and music. She carefully avoided any mention of the events that had led to her decision to become a mail-order bride, and Frederick, sensing her reticence, didn't press for details. When they finally retired for the night, Frederick escorted her to the main bedroom, now their bedroom, but excused himself, saying he would sleep in one of the spare rooms until she was ready for him to join her. Alone in the large bed that night, Nora felt a complex mixture of emotions: relief at Frederick's understanding, gratitude for his kindness, and a surprising twinge of disappointment. She had prepared herself for the possibility of fulfilling her marital duties immediately, had steeled herself for it. Frederick's willingness to wait was both a comfort and, oddly, a slight to her pride. Did he not find her attractive? Was he having second thoughts about their arrangement? Sleep came fitfully, her dreams filled with fragments of her past and uncertainty about her future. The next morning, life at the ranch resumed its normal rhythm. Frederick rose early to work with the men, and Nora set about establishing her role as mistress of the house. She cleaned rooms that had clearly not seen a woman's touch in years, rearranged furniture to create a more welcoming atmosphere, and began planning a proper garden for the neglected plot Frederick had shown her. Over the next few weeks, they settled into a routine. Frederick worked from dawn until dusk with the cattle and horses, while Nora transformed the house and started her garden. In the evenings, they would eat together and talk, gradually building a companionship that, while not romantic, was comfortable and increasingly warm. Frederick kept his word about giving her time, continuing to sleep in the spare room. But Nora noticed the way his eyes followed her sometimes when he thought she wasn't looking, a mixture of admiration and longing that stirred something within her own heart. One evening, about a month after their wedding, a severe thunderstorm struck the ranch. Lightning flashed across the sky, followed by deafening claps of thunder. The rain came down in sheets, pounding against the roof and windows. Nora was in the kitchen when Frederick burst through the door, soaked to the skin and covered in mud. "Creek's rising fast," he reported. "We need to move the cattle to higher ground." He grabbed his slicker and was back out the door before Nora could respond. Through the window, she watched as he and the ranch hands rode off into the storm, driving the cattle toward the hills on the north side of the property. Hours passed with no sign of them. The storm continued to rage, the wind howling around the house like a living thing. Nora paced anxiously, peering out windows into the darkness, seeing nothing but rain and occasional flashes of lightning illuminating an empty yard. Finally, well past midnight, she heard the sound of horses in the yard. She rushed to the door to find Frederick dismounting, his slicker torn, his face streaked with rain and exhaustion. "Are you all right?" she asked, helping him inside. "Lost 3 head," he said grimly. "Could have been worse. Pete took a fall, might have broken his arm. The Harper boys are taking him to the doctor in town." Nora helped him out of his wet clothes, her hands efficient but gentle as she peeled away layers of soaked fabric. She brought him dry clothes and heated water for him to wash away the mud. As she tended to him, something shifted between them. The concern in her eyes, the gentleness of her touch, these were not merely the actions of a woman fulfilling a contractual obligation. And Frederick's gratitude, the way he leaned into her care, this was not simply the response of a man to a convenient housekeeper. When he was clean and dry, she brought him hot coffee and leftover stew, sitting beside him at the kitchen table as he ate. "Thank you," he said simply, his eyes meeting hers over the rim of his cup. "I was worried," she admitted. "Were you?" There was a hint of pleased surprise in his voice. Of course, you're my husband. The word hung between them, suddenly weighted with meaning beyond its legal definition. That night when they went upstairs, Frederick paused outside the main bedroom door. "Good night, Nora." She caught his hand before he could turn away. "Stay," she said softly. "Please." In the dim light of the hallway, she saw his eyes widen with surprise, then darken with an emotion that made her heart beat faster. "Are you sure?" he asked. Nora nodded. "I'm your wife, in name only so far, but I think I'd like to be your wife in truth." Frederick followed her into the bedroom, his movements careful, almost reverent. When he kissed her, it was nothing like the chaste peck they had shared at their wedding. This kiss was deep and searching, a question and an answer all at once. Their first night together as true husband and wife was tender and awkward by turns, but ultimately sweet. Frederick was patient and gentle, mindful of her inexperience. For Nora, the act was both less frightening and more moving than she had anticipated. There was pain, yes, but also a surprising pleasure and, more importantly, a sense of connection that transcended the physical. Afterward, lying in his arms, Nora felt a peace she hadn't expected to find in this marriage of convenience. Frederick stroked her hair, his calloused fingers surprisingly gentle. "I never thought I'd find this," he murmured. "After the war, I figured I'd live out my days alone on this ranch, and I never thought I'd find safety and kindness in the arms of a stranger," Nora replied. Frederick propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at her with serious eyes. "I'm not a stranger anymore, am I?" "No," she smiled, touching his face. "Not a stranger at all." As spring turned to summer, Nora and Frederick's marriage deepened. What had begun as an arrangement of convenience was blossoming into something neither had dared hope for: genuine love. Nora's garden thrived under her care, providing fresh vegetables for their table. The house became truly a home, with small touches reflecting her personality: books in the parlor, wildflowers in jars on the tables, curtains she had sewn herself at the windows. Frederick found himself looking forward to returning to the house each evening, to the light in the windows and the smell of cooking food. But most of all, to Nora's smile when she greeted him at the door. He began teaching her to ride, and sometimes they would explore the ranch together on horseback, his pride evident as he showed her the boundaries of their land. But as their happiness grew, so did Nora's anxiety about her past. She had told Frederick very little about her reasons for leaving Boston, and the secret weighed on her. Each letter that arrived from back east, infrequent notes from her mother, filled with recrimination, and gossip brought a shadow to her eyes that Frederick couldn't help but notice. One evening in late July, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Frederick finally broached the subject that had been on his mind. "Nora, I've never pressed you about your life before you came here. Figured you'd tell me when you were ready." He took her hand. "But I can see something's troubling you. Whatever it is, you can tell me." Nora stared out at the golden light washing over the rangeland, gathering her courage. "I'm afraid you'll think less of me if you know." "Not possible," he said firmly. She took a deep breath. "In Boston, I was engaged to a man named Charles Blackwood. He came from a good family, was well respected in society. My mother was delighted with the match." Her voice grew bitter. What she didn't know, what no one knew, was that Charles had a cruel streak. He hid it well in public, but when we were alone. Frederick's hand tightened around hers, but he remained silent, letting her tell the story in her own way. At first it was just harsh words, criticism, then he began to control me, who I could see, what I could wear. One night after I had spoken to an old friend at a social gathering, a male friend, he became enraged. Her voice faltered. He struck me, not just once, but repeatedly, said I had humiliated him, said I needed to be taught my place. Frederick's face darkened with anger, but still he didn't interrupt. I managed to get away from him that night, but I knew it would happen again. Worse, I knew no one would believe me if I spoke out. His family was too powerful, too respected. My own mother refused to believe me when I tried to tell her. Nora wiped away a tear. So I broke off the engagement, which created quite a scandal. No one would receive me in society after that. I saw your advertisement in the paper, and it seemed like my only escape." She finally turned to look at Frederick, fear in her eyes. "Now you know I'm damaged goods. I let a man treat me that way. I was too weak to stop," Frederick said, his voice gentle but firm. "You weren't weak. You were incredibly strong. You got away from him. You traveled across the country alone to build a new life. That takes more courage than most people will ever know. You don't think less of me? I think more of you, he said honestly. And if I ever meet this Charles Blackwood, he'll regret the day he laid a hand on you. For the first time since leaving Boston, Nora felt the weight of shame lift from her shoulders. Frederick didn't blame her, didn't see her as tainted by her past. In his eyes, she was brave, not broken. That night as they lay together in bed, Nora whispered, "I'm filthy, Frederick. Soiled by what happened, by the rumors and scandal I left behind." Frederick pulled her close, his voice fierce with emotion. "Then let me wash the past away. Let us build something clean and good together here in this place." His kiss tasted of promise and redemption, and Nora surrendered to it, feeling truly free for the first time in years. As August turned to September, bringing the first hints of autumn to the rangeland, Nora discovered she was with child. When she told Frederick, his face lit up with a joy she had never seen before. He lifted her in his arms and spun her around the kitchen, both of them laughing with delight. "A baby," he kept saying, as if he couldn't quite believe it. "Our baby." The news cemented their place in the community. Mrs. Thompson clucked approvingly when told, immediately beginning to knit tiny garments for the coming child. The women of Silvercreek, who had initially viewed Nora with suspicion as an outsider, now welcomed her into their circle, sharing advice and hand-me-down baby items. Frederick became even more protective of Nora, insisting she rest frequently and hiring a local girl to help with the heavier household chores. He expanded the garden for her, building a low fence around it to keep out rabbits, and began plans for adding a nursery to the house. As Nora's body changed with the growing life inside her, so too did her feelings about herself and her past. The shame that had driven her from Boston seemed increasingly distant, replaced by a quiet pride in the life she was building with Frederick. She began to see herself not as a woman fleeing scandal, but as a woman embracing possibility. One crisp October morning, as they sat at breakfast, Frederick surprised her with news. "Got a letter yesterday from a man in Boston," he said casually. "Name of Wilson. Says he's a lawyer representing Charles Blackwood." Nora froze, the color draining from her face. "What does he want?" "Seems your former fiancé has been telling people that you stole jewelry from him before you left. Valuable family pieces." Frederick's voice was calm, but Nora could see the anger simmering beneath. "This lawyer says they'll press charges unless you return the items or pay compensation." "That's absurd," Nora exclaimed. "I never took anything that wasn't mine. The only jewelry I owned were pieces my father had given me before he died." "I know," Frederick said. "It's just another way for him to control you, to punish you for leaving." "What are we going to do?" Nora asked, her hand instinctively moving to her belly. Frederick reached across the table and took her other hand. "I've already replied to the lawyer, told him that any further communication should be directed to our attorney in Carson City. Told him that if Blackwood continues with these false allegations, we'll counter with charges of our own assault, battery, defamation of character. Do you think that will stop him?" "Men like Blackwood are cowards at heart," Frederick said confidently. "They only have power when their victims are isolated and afraid. You're not alone anymore, Nora, and you're certainly not afraid." Nora squeezed his hand, realizing he was right. The news that might have terrified her 6 months ago now seemed merely an unpleasant reminder of a life she had left behind. She was Nora Jameson now, not Nora Mitchell. Wife, soon-to-be mother, mistress of her own home, and partner to a man who respected and loved her. "No," she agreed. "I'm not afraid anymore." True to Frederick's prediction, they heard nothing more from Charles Blackwood or his lawyer. Whether it was the threat of counter-charges or simply the realization that Nora was truly beyond his reach, Charles apparently decided to abandon his vendetta. As winter settled over the rangeland, Nora's pregnancy progressed. The house was snug and warm against the cold, the pantry well stocked with preserves from her garden and meat from the fall slaughter. Frederick hired an additional hand to help with the winter work, allowing him to spend more time at home with Nora. They spent the long evenings reading aloud to each other or simply talking, planning for the future, sharing dreams and fears. Frederick spoke of expanding the herd, of building the ranch into a legacy they could pass on to their children. Nora talked of starting a small school on the ranch for their child and the children of the ranch hands and neighboring homesteads. You'd make a fine teacher, Frederick told her. You've got the patience for it and the learning. Do you really think it's possible? Nora asked, warming to the idea. I think anything's possible for us, he replied, and the conviction in his voice made her believe it too. Their baby, a daughter they named Faith Elizabeth Jameson, was born on a cold, clear February morning in 1874. The birth was difficult but uncomplicated, with Mrs. Thompson serving as midwife and Frederick pacing anxiously downstairs, until the first cry of his daughter brought him running. When he saw Nora holding their child, exhausted but radiant, something in Frederick's heart that had been closed since the war finally opened completely. This was what he had been building toward all these years without knowing it, not just a ranch, but a family, a legacy of love rather than loss. She's perfect, he whispered, gently touching the downy head with one calloused finger. Just like her mother, Nora looked up at him, her eyes filled with tears of joy and fatigue. Thank you, Frederick. For what? He asked, puzzled. For answering my letter, for bringing me here. For giving me a chance at happiness when I thought it was lost to me forever. Frederick leaned down and kissed her forehead, then his daughter's. No, Nora, thank you for being brave enough to come. As spring returned to the rangeland, bringing new growth and renewal, the Jameson ranch thrived. Faith grew stronger each day, her dark hair and blue eyes a perfect blend of her parents'. Frederick expanded the herd, his careful management beginning to show returns. And Nora started a small school in the converted bunkhouse, teaching not only the Harper brothers, but also 3 children from neighboring homesteads. On a warm May evening, exactly 1 year after Nora had first arrived in Silvercreek, she and Frederick sat on the porch swing, watching the sunset while Faith slept in her cradle beside them. Hard to believe it's been a year, Frederick remarked, his arm around Nora's shoulders. So much has changed, she agreed. When I stepped off that stagecoach, I was so afraid. I had no idea what to expect, what kind of man you would be. And I had no idea what kind of woman was coming to me, Frederick smiled. All I knew was what you'd written in your letters, that you were educated, from a good family, and looking for a fresh start in the West. Were you disappointed? Nora asked, a trace of old insecurity in her voice. Frederick turned to look at her, his eyes serious. Nora Jameson, you are more than I ever dared hope for. You brought life and warmth back to this house, back to me. You gave me a beautiful daughter and a reason to build something that will last beyond my lifetime. He took her hand, running his thumb over the gold band with its tiny pearl. When you first arrived, covered in dust from the journey, I thought you were the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. But that was nothing compared to how I see you now, strong, brave, loving, the heart of our home. Nora leaned into him, feeling the solid strength of his body against hers. I never expected to find love here. I just wanted safety, a chance to start over. And I just wanted someone to cook my meals and warm my bed, Frederick admitted with a rueful smile. I got so much more than I bargained for. We both did, Nora said softly. As the last rays of sunlight painted the rangeland in gold, Nora thought about the journey that had brought her to this place, not just the physical journey across the continent, but the emotional one, from fear to love, from shame to pride. The past had not been washed away entirely. It had shaped her, made her who she was. But here, with Frederick and Faith, she had found something she had never expected, not just escape, but belonging. Not just safety, but joy. In the distance, a coyote called to its mate, the sound echoing across the open land that had become home. Nora smiled and nestled closer to her husband, content in the knowledge that sometimes the longest journeys lead exactly where you need to go.